Good evening and welcome to the Environment and Sustainability panel. Item number 1, welcome and announcements. Hello and welcome to this meeting on the Thursday, the 24th of June 2021. Good evening and welcome to the Environment and Sustainability panel. Item number 1, welcome and announcements. Hello and welcome to this meeting on the Thursday, the 24th of June 2021. Good evening and welcome to the Environment and Sustainability. We're taking a short pause because I think we have an IT issue. Number 1, welcome and announcements. Hello and welcome to this meeting on. Perhaps we could broadcast. Welcome to the Environment and Sustainability panel. Hello, and I'm Councillor Julie Young. The meeting is happening on Thursday, the 24th of June 2021. I'm Councillor for the Greenstead Ward and I will be chairing this meeting this evening. If I turn to my right and invite other councillors and officers to introduce themselves.
Good evening, David King, Councillor for Mile End.
Lee Scordis, Councillor for Old Heath, Hive and Rowhedge.
Good evening, Rory Doyle, Assistant Director for Environment.
Good evening, Mandy Jones, Assistant Director, Place and Client Services.
Good evening, Councillor Mark Corey, Representative for Wivenhoe Ward.
Good evening, Councillor John Jowers, representing West Mercia Byfleet.
Good evening, Councillor Pauline Hazel, representing Shrub End Ward, substituting for Councillor Lewis Barber.
And good evening, Matthew Evans, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you very much. This meeting is being held in the Moot Hall, in the Town Hall in Colchester, and also is being broadcast live via Zoom over the internet on the Council's YouTube channel, where it will be available to watch afterwards. For those attending here in the Moot Hall, I can assure you that a risk assessment including COVID-19 risks has been undertaken for this meeting. Can I remind everyone that seating is socially distanced with the 2 metres between each seat. Please do not move the chairs. Masks can be removed when seated. All desks and microphones have been sanitised before the meeting. And I ask that members of the public or visiting councillors sanitise the Have Your Say microphone before speaking, using the antiseptic wipes provided. Councillors and officers taking part in the meeting are requested to mute their microphones. Please activate the microphone when invited to speak and turn the microphone off again when you have finished speaking. With the exception of Democratic Services, officers advising us would participate, both those joining us online and in the Moot Hall. Please mute their microphones unless they are invited to speak. The provisions in the Constitution around the timing of breaks will apply to this meeting. The Environment and Sustainability panel explores methods of conservation of natural habitats and biodiversity through adapting existing practices or creating new ecologically diverse environments. The panel encourages renewable energy generation and carbon footprint reduction in both the public and private sectors by examining air and water quality, plastic and waste reduction, and renewable energy generation. The panel monitors the progress and implementation of the Council's Emergency Climate Action Plan and regularly reports to Cabinet and full Council. If we move on to item number 2, we have substitutions. And we've got Councillor Hazel, who's also already indicating that she's substituting for Councillor Barber this evening. We've had a late apology for Councillor Peter Chillingworth, which I'm sorry to say he's unwell this evening and can't be with us. We will miss his input. If we move on to item number 3, members, we've got urgent items, and I have no urgent items this evening. Moving on to item number 4, we've got declarations of interest. Do I have any indications from members here if they have a declaration of interest to make? I see no indications. Item number 5, minutes of the previous meeting. Can I ask that panel members confirm that the minutes of the previous meeting are a correct record? Those of you who were here. I have an indication from Councillor Corey. Is that seconded? Yes, it is, by Councillor King. Thank you for that. Moving on to item number 6, which is have your say. There have been 4 submissions of have your say from Mr. Dave Smith, former Councillor Cyril Liddy, Andrew Wilkinson from Inform, and Grace Stark. Cyril will attend the meeting. Oh no, Cyril is on Zoom, I believe, so we'll see Cyril shortly. But we're going to start with Dave Smith, which is a written submission. And I also have 2 visiting councillors that may wish to address us. Matthew, well, should I invite those to come forward first?
Yes, it's entirely within your gift.
Okay, can I have Councillor Gocher, please? You have 3 minutes, I'm sure you're aware, and the bell will sound after 2.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick points about plastic bags. I've had the traders in Culver Street raise with me the issue of whether it would be possible to provide them with these cotton bags in some way, because they're desperate to go plastic bag free, but at the moment for them it's not cost effective. I know that some of the big shops in the Culver area are, such as HMV, increasingly providing cotton bags, but for the street traders it's just not economically viable for them to do it without help. So what I'm wondering is if there's anything we could do to maybe help them, in the sense that is there any money available where maybe the council can put some in the pot, maybe councillors from localities' budgets can put some in the pot, and then maybe the traders themselves put some in the pot to just provide a load of these things, which they're desperate to give out to their customers. Because they do enrich the street and the area, particularly on Fridays and Saturdays, and it would just be great to do something to help them be a bit more enviro-friendly. The other issue was that I had a resident called Katie contact me saying that ASDA has stopped its service whereby they accept plastic bags for recycling, and she doesn't know where she can get plastic bags recycled, and she obviously just puts them in the black bags. Because they can't go in the clear sacks for our plastic recycling. So I'm just wondering if there's anything we can do about plastic bag recycling. Thank you.
I would give a bit of an answer myself and then ask perhaps Mandy Jones if she can give some further information. Many years ago, I remember former councillor Steve Ford led a bit of a campaign to rid plastic bags from the borough council's use. And we moved over in terms of our gifts shop at the castle from providing plastic bags, as we were at the time, to doing paper bags. So we've kind of done it in-house, but I hear what you say in terms of our market traders. And I, wonder if Mandy could sort of take that away and see if there is any funding we could access to help our traders with that. Because if we provide, we've done bags actually. I think we've Colchester market bags. I think I've got one at home somewhere, but that was many years ago, and maybe we need to refresh that and ask customers to bring that back each time they shop in the town centre. And of course, it's a good advertisement, isn't it? The other issue about plastic bag recycling, I know that, recently Colchester Food Bank were really desperate for plastic bags to put food in. So I think, that's something perhaps we can, do some connections for, to make sure maybe we have a facility that we could take plastic bags and then pass them on to the food bank so that they could use going forward. I've got Councillor Corey who wants to comment.
Thank you, Chair. The first point, Mark, I think is a really good idea, something that I wish we'd put in place a bit earlier. But it's this kind of panel, the kind of area that we have in terms of our remit is to support businesses, not just council operations, but beyond, to encourage them to be greener. I think it's something we definitely could look at putting to Cabinet. That's our job, to put good ideas to Cabinet. And I think it could be something that does help subsidise, at least, at worst, subsidise them purchasing bags or us getting something back from each trader. We've also got, as Mandy might reference shortly, we had some opening up of the High Streets Fund money that perhaps could go towards this. I know it's meant to be more for public health, but it's long-term public health, and reusing a bag personally is not a danger at all. So I'd really like us to see sort of something formed up around this as a recommendation to Cabinet that supports business and could work, I think Councillor King just indicated, with the BID, who we worked with very well over the last few years. They might also want to see what funding they could use themselves and match fund. So it could be that Colchester just puts in a third towards a project where the BID may support, we may be able to find other funding, and the traders themselves may put in a third. So it's all kind of contributing. I just thought, Chair, that actually this is something we could take on. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I've got Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. I'm with the previous speakers on this. Much as my old habits as portfolio holder and the past for resources means, I think spending money, what are we doing? I think this is absolutely right that we have a look at this. My recommendation to Mandy, if she'll take it, would be that, as I know she would, that we'll look at all the choices. A good illustration is a number of key suppliers and supermarkets. The cooperative is one. Will provide a fully compostable, biodegradable bag, and it's 3p dearer. It obviously costs them, I think, a little bit extra, but it's 3p dearer than the charge that has to be made for a bag. So I think we just have to sort of look at this in the round. The principle is right. I'm with Councillor Gocher and Councillor Coy on this, as with you, Chair. But I think the responsible thing to do is take it in the round and see what the choices and options are. And one possibility is, as you said, Mark, that the BID could see this as an appropriate, as well as an attractive thing to do in marketing terms. And I would really suggest we do go there almost first in all of the circumstances. But we have to just bear in mind that there are many traders and many companies, many people struggling to make a living, wanting to make an impact. So we just have to bear that in mind. All the smaller stores and shops, for example, down the lanes, Mark, which I know you pay a real interest in. So that's an absolute yes, but I'd just like us to be careful about how we construct the way ahead and make sure that we take the BID with us. That will help play off the favouritism suggestion which we might otherwise get about one business versus another. Thank you.
Mandy, did you want to respond? I think Councillor King is right. We have to look at this in the round and perhaps bring it back to the panel at a future meeting. But if you wanted to give some comment, that would be very welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Yes, I think one of the issues is around raising awareness, isn't it? And actually the Welcome Back Fund does have at its heart marketing and making sure that people are aware and in terms of economic recovery. So we look to embed our climate change and sustainability objectives throughout everything. So that could become part of some of that marketing that we're doing there. I think the suggestion from the BID is a really interesting and good one. And there are also creative ways of looking at things like sponsorship. And so I think the sort of the financial options are ones that we'll probably need to take away and have a little bit of a look at and think about how we do that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Goetsch, you have a further minute if you wanted to use it.
No, I mean, thank you for the responses, and anything that we can do to maybe help them would be, I'm sure, gratefully appreciated by the traders and by other small traders in the area as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much for attending. I like it, councillors are now doing the cleaning themselves. That's good to see. Councillor Cox, would you like to step forward and address the panel? Okay, Councillor Cox is here to observe, I believe, this evening, so thank you for attending. We'll move on to a written submission then from Mr. Dave Smith, and I think, Matthew, you're going to read that to us.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The submission from Mr. Smith is relating to flooding at the Hive, and he says, for a very long time, over a year at least, my family, neighbours and my family business have had severe disruption on occasions and disruption in general on a weekly basis and at certain times on a daily basis. This is causing effectively getting cut off at high tides, in particular when there's heavy rain. Haven Road at times becomes hazardous to pass. On the worst occasions, it is fully submerged underwater. I have for a long time made ward councillors, our MP and the press aware. Some of the images supplied in the press have been provided by my family. In the worst cases, the floods have seen cars abandoned after getting caught in the floods, and this then leads to major chaos. Coming from the Tesco direction, it causes a backup as far as all of Clinghoe Hill, affecting those from Wivenhoe and Elmstead wanting to come to Colchester. Traffic coming along St Andrews Avenue to go to Tesco or through the Whitehall Industrial Estate back up to Harwich Road, causing problems there. From Old Heath, we struggle to get through, and this causes other issues down Old Heath Road, Recreation Road, Port Lane and Hive Hill as people try and get through. We're constantly having to check tide tables as some journeys have to be made at a certain time. An example being today, my 5-year-old granddaughter stays with us a few days a week. She goes to Friars Grove School. Today's high tide was 9 metres 37, so my wife would have had a difficult return journey knowing the road will be flooded. Recently, my wife had to leave an hour early to travel to Brightlingsea to take her elderly mother to a dentist appointment. It's ridiculous that on a daily basis, we're having to think what time are we likely to experience flooding. Recently, a doctor had to climb out of her abandoned car. There needs to be a permanent fix for this unacceptable disruption to people's lives and businesses. People's cars are being damaged. I'm in the motor trade and have seen some of the damage that's been done to people's cars. At last, the situation is being taken seriously, and I hope the experts can find a permanent solution, whatever the cost. If millions can be spent on 2 roundabouts at Ipswich and Harwich Road, money must be spent on resolving a flood problem that disrupts thousands of people. And that's the end of the submission, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evans. Is there any comments from the panel on that? Councillor Scourgis and Councillor Jowers, who's got lots of experience with the Strood that he can bring to bear. Councillor Scourgis first, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think Mr. Smith is aware that we have currently set up a Hive task force with the MP and other partner agencies looking at this work and very much taking initiative that we want this issue finally solved, because it is a main route in and out of Colchester for the south of Colchester. When it does flood, it brings the town to a complete halt. We have looked at temporary measures with highways around signage about flooding, but that's not always going to deter people, and there are businesses down there. So there is work ongoing. I think it's going to take a long time, but we've finally got partner agencies working together again, which has taken some time. So there is some positive news moving forward on that.
Thank you very much. I think Mr. Doyle will come in at the end, but next, Councillor Jowers, please.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, this has been long ongoing. In fact, you can date it back probably about 20 years, when what happened was that we got rid of our dredger. Now, for many of the councillors here, they wouldn't be old enough. They'd probably still mark, the joys of being young. We had this magnificent machine, steam engine, which used to pump into barges and then take them out to the lagoons between here and Rohich, and made amazing feeding grounds for birds. We got a new harbour master. We scrapped the machine because the crown wheel had gone, and we bought a massively expensive digger on a pontoon, which didn't work at all. It was eventually sold to Bradwell Marine because it was such a flop. And from there onwards, what people don't realise is, of course, that silt does not come down. It is brought up on the tide and then deposited because you have a barrier at Marriage's Mill. So what I think has happened, and what most of the people who use the Hythe over the years, is that the outfall from Distillery Pond has jammed open. And therefore, as the tide comes up and you don't put the barrier up at Wivenhoe, the water comes up on the road. It always used to before the barrier anyway. Equally, if you do put the barrier up and there's been a lot of rain, the water from Distillery Pond floods at the bottom. effectively it needs major work on a new flat valve. The reason I'm bringing this up is I think I'm on the regional flood defence body for East Anglia. It used to be, and one never knows at County Hall quite where you are and what you're on. But in the joys of being back on a really good one, I will push this because it's an embarrassment. And Councillor Scottish is right about it's a busy road. It's actually our South Circular Road. It takes all the traffic. It's the first crossing on the river. And to have that is just ridiculous. There was some comment made, I think, at another meeting last week about why don't we issue paddle boards to our commuters going round the Hythe. Not helpful, I didn't think at all. We do have an issue that we need to look more closely at the Hythe than what we're going to do with it as part of the cleaning up and regeneration and new student accommodation and what we can do. And part of that is to maybe get rid of the great crop of shopping trolleys hidden under the mud that is holding up this flat valve. But it's not a Colchester, it's a Colchester issue, but it's not something I think that Colchester necessarily is geared up and should do. It should be putting the pressure on, but I think that it's the Anglian Water and Environment Agency who should take the major steps. But of course, they won't do that unless they are really pushed, because this is going to be a pretty major chunk of work. I will do what I can, but I'm pleased that we are continuing to put pressure on. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a really important area for us to be debating, and management of the river is something I think we've all got some interest in terms of what's happening there at the Hythe, but for other places. And I think former Councillor Liddy will talk about further along the river later. Mr. Doyle, were you able to throw any light on where we are with this issue?
Thank you, Chair. So as Councillor Scordis and Councillor Jowers alluded to, this requires a multi-agency response. And I'm pleased to say, as Councillor Scordis has set out, there is a task force that's come together recently to meet to discuss the issues. I am aware that works have been undertaken recently by Anglian Water. So Councillor Jowers refers to the flat valve. I know that some work has been undertaken very recently. Our own engineers have been in liaison with them. I understand that's been successful to a degree. I understand there was a high tide today, a spring high tide, and certainly from what we were seeing from the monitoring is we weren't seeing the same kind of impact that we've had recently that we would expect to see, certainly with the level of tide we've had in recent weeks. So it looks like there's an improvement based on those works. Of course, that's not necessarily a complete solution. I'm sure the agencies will continue to work together to monitor. With regard to the work to Distillery Pond, I know our colleagues at County Council have undertaken a significant amount of work in terms of surface water and the drainage from Distillery Pond. So it is a complex issue. Haven Road is below the high tide line in itself. So to an extent, there will always be a degree of flood risk in that area. Obviously, what we need to do is ensure that we mitigate it sufficiently. And I'm pleased to say, and I hope that the multi-agency response that we have now will move this forward in the right direction.
Thank you for that. Well, we certainly all hope that there is a solution that's found sooner rather than later. So we thank Mr. Smith for raising it with the panel this evening. If we move on now to Cyril Liddy, who I think is joining us on Zoom.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for having me to speak. Sadly, the River Colne is dirty and unloved, yet it is the single feature that defines both our town and the surrounding villages. It gives us our name. It also reminds us that we are poor custodians of our natural heritage, despite our good intentions and all the hard work of CBC staff. Ever since Parliament passed the Colchester Borough Council Act in 2001, which allowed CBC to close the harbour to commercial shipping and absolve it of its harbourage obligations, the condition of the river has deteriorated steadily. I want to make a special plea for Wivenhoe Ferry Marsh, which is a nature reserve and prone to serious flooding due to the silting up of a poorly constructed sluice as part of a Section 106 agreement with developers. When it rains heavily, the marsh is a breeding ground for mosquitoes, and that is a public health hazard. The Wivenhoe Trail is almost impassable, and there is a risk that floodwater could erode the railway embankment. If so, Network Rail may look to share the cost of any repair work. The marsh has three parts. The northern end is owned by CBC and has its management plan. The southern end forms part of the West Key estate. The middle part, which includes the riverbank facing Rowhedge and the silted up sluice, remains vested in the Crown, and I'm not talking about the Netflix series, as part of the assets of the defunct Wivenhoe Quay Limited. CBC actually owns the bed of the River Colne all the way down to Point Clear, so it is in a unique position to act. I urge CBC to take its stewardship of the river seriously, as I'm sure it does, and get a grip of this flooding problem. CBC must act decisively to acquire the middle part of Ferry Marsh at no cost, as per the Section 106 agreement with the developers, and apply any unspent funds in constructing a properly functioning sluice. Please do not say it is the responsibility of one of the other agencies that manages the rivers. Please do not waste time and money in a futile pursuit of developers or their agents. That money would be better spent on tackling the bad drainage on Ferry Marsh. Please do show political leadership and place the management of the River Colne in general and Ferry Marsh in particular at the heart of CBC's environmental strategy. And please do not shunt it into an obscure budget where it will be forgotten. Before I go, the flooding of Ferry Marsh is one of a number of problems that are the result of decades of underfunding, and there is much catch-up work to be done, so please act now. Finally, if we're serious about tackling climate change, managing flood risk and preserving the environment for future generations, I implore councillors not to descend into recriminations, but to look to the future and learn to love the river again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Liddy. Do I have, oh yes, Councillor Corey wants to come in. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Cyril. As Ward Councillor, the last email I received on Ferry Marsh, because it is an issue that we are very much aware of, Steve Collis, one of our officers, is working to try and bring the land that is in the Crown Estate into Colchester Borough Council ownership in order for us to access the sluice more easily to reach a sustainable solution. So on the 21st of June, he said that he was already working with the Vistry Group, who have taken over this site, on adoption in another area, and hopefully that Ferry Marsh could follow with the same kind of agreement. So at the moment, we've got that far with it. I think Cyril will know back in 2018, I was able to get the Environment Agency to clean the sluice in order for the marsh to drain as much as possible. But we must also understand that we are an environment and sustainability panel, which is about conservation as well. So the marsh has evolved, and there are water voles, for example, making a greater habitat in the centre of the marsh. Wivenhoe residents will know that you used to be able to walk through the marsh in the centre, but I think we'll have to accept that the balance of nature has turned, and we may need to allow that to be natural and not under sort of human impact. But of course, I agree we must protect the Wivenhoe Trail, where the waters are lapping up to at the moment. So I hope that the pleas that are made about the Borough Council taking it on will come through. I'll keep pushing on that, and that we will eventually get the Environment Agency to find a solution that is sustainable with us. I'd like to find a local solution, and I've spoken to members of the Sailing Club who may be able to help with a solution from the river, cleaning the sluice more regularly. But also the Environment Agency has had cuts, which was in the news the other day. The CEO saying that after 2/3 of their money being cut, they cannot keep up with the maintenance of rivers and the protection of wildlife in the way that they would like to. So I think there's a bigger piece here that we could bring back to this panel about our river and its protection. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Giles.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm inclined to agree with Mark Corey, because he's, Cyril's right. It was Colchester, it was Camp on the Colne. It is our history. It's the core. If you look up there, you'll see a raven somewhere on one of these, and that was Port Reeve And when we gave up the harbour, in my view, I opposed it. Anyway, I think it's one of the worst things we ever did. On our fishing boat, CK, is Colchester Creek, first letter and last letter. I think that Ferry Marsh has got some sort of designation, to my knowledge, that it is seen as being environmentally very useful. But we struggled, and I'd be interested to hear if officers would update me on the owner of the lease of the river, which went up as far as Middle Mill. He actually charged Paxman's Angling Club for the use of it. And anything that we tried to do was absolutely stymied. And it was a lease that had never actually gained us any money of any kind at all. Very complex issue in that as a tenant. Now, I've got a suspicion that might have been resolved. And if it has, that means that we have much more responsibility and capacity to look at the river than we had in the past. Nostalgia not being what it used to be, but I can remember when we proposed to have a Fishgate Weir put in. My view was it should have been put in at Rowhedge. It would have given us a massive area of usable water, and we also could have maintained and retained the Ferry Marsh. But it's going to be a massive thing to do. If we want to change that, and Cyril's asking, that we get rid of stagnant water and whatever. In fact, he can go anywhere he likes around the marshes, and you'll find in the summertime these small pools are breeding grounds for mosquitoes. Many years ago, we had a councillor on Mersey who dished out little vials of kerosene oil, which were put on these pools and on people's water butts, and lo and behold, the mosquitoes went away. Probably a good thing, because the GP in Tolleshant, Darcy, when he died in 1932, had 27 gallons of quinine. There actually had been cases of malaria. I'm full of useless information like this, Mark. But the point being that, yes, you have to make the balance between what is a conservation area, and there's a wonderful example further down at Fingringhoe Wick, where the seawall was breached to allow salt water in. My memories of Ferry Marsh, I believe, were during coal strike, when it was massive warehouses which contained vast tonnage of coal being brought into strike break. I mean, it has a history. I would much rather see it utilised for environmental purposes, but it's the management scheme that we really need to be looking at. And it's not a small thing to do. I can probably see officers wincing as we talk about it, because how do you get that balance as to where Cyril would like us to get to, where financially we could get to, and actually environmentally, what is the best thing to do? Because saltings and grazing marsh are one of our most precious assets. We've lost about 96% of them over the last century. So how do you make this human-friendly, but also environmentally sustainable in a very sensitive part of the river? So I'm quite happy to push this forward, and I think probably Cabinet could quite sensibly look at this. And I think that the wider point is that we need to publicise the fact we've probably got the most beautiful untouched river in East Anglia. And you look at the Orwell, it is full of plastic Tupperware boats. Well, there's a few decent wooden ones. Everywhere you go, it's moorings and marinas and people. And because we were a commercial harbour, we haven't got that. We have a pristine, really environmentally friendly river that we could make so much of. And I think that, again, I'm saying things I probably said 15, 20 years ago, Julie, but, why have we not increased the number of access points on the river for the public? I mean, remember when they built those new houses in Rowhedge, we put a slipway in and the owners moved in and put a gate across it. Absolutely unbelievable. This massive asset, and particularly the Hythe, and particularly Rowhedge and Wivenhoe. So yeah, I'll support this idea of Cyril's, but it's not just, we will make it human friendly. It has to be a much wider view than that. So I'll be interested to hear what officers think might be possible. That's put them on the spot, hasn't it?
And now we're over to the officers. Oh, hang on, we've got 2 more contributions from members. So Councillor King and then Councillor Scordis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say, John, that's absolutely spot on for me. I love a man who mixes a bit of history, tradition, and possibility all in one monologue. That's excellent. My sort of serious point, and that is serious as well, is that there's been a conversation about where responsibility for looking at the river should sit. And the suggestion to us, and we understood why, Madam Chair, given the breadth of what we're already looking at, was that this might go to the Policy Committee first of all. Having made that decision, I think we have to a degree, live with it. But I think we must, as a committee, ensure that during the course of the year ahead, we are kept well sighted. And at some stage, we receive here what the emerging stewardship picture is going ahead. It's compelling that there is opportunity here. Whatever opportunity form takes, recreational, human engagement with nature, environmental protections and exploitation in the best sense, that's what lies ahead of us. But this is something that we have to have a conversation between ourselves, with the wider public and the potential users. And we can today, response to Cyril, but I think as a whole, as a group, as a committee, make very plain the importance we attached to the river and all its forms and all the impacts it has, and the active stewardship. It's neglected. In my 3 years, hardly any more than a passing reference. Needs, must, responses to issues, but no forward step. This is the time which we have to make sure this happens. So if colleagues agree, if you agree, Madam Chair, we accept that this is going for a conversation at policy. It has to come back here. Thank you.
Councillor Scordis.
Thank you, Chair. I have reservations about taking it to policy because when I was on the policy panel, Councillor Jowers may remember, we had this exact topic about the river. Darius Laws, before I think it was between when he was a councillor and wasn't, came to the panel with ideas, much of which you've talked about, John. So I'm worried that it will just bounce back and forth and nothing will happen. It's a very big piece of work, don't get me wrong, but there's significant parts of that would be suitable for this panel. So I wouldn't be in favour of sending it to policy because I feel it will bounce into the never regions of policy that we never see again. It'll be recommended to Cabinet as it was before and won't be discussed. And Councillor Laws was passionate about doing work here. So I'd suggest it's something we take on as a panel, or parts of it that we can, maybe around the sustainability and the environmental aspects of it. Policy perhaps could look at other aspects of it, whether there's commercial gain from the river in certain areas, probably not the Wivenhoe Rowhedge side. But as I say, I wouldn't be in favour of putting it all into policy. There's some substantial work we could do as a committee on the environmental side.
I've got Councillor Jazz that wants to come back on that, I presume, on that proposal.
As a member of the policy panel, so I wouldn't I? And actually it's music to my ears. And for those, there aren't many who were at the policy panel. I believe Councillor Gocher was, and our two visitors really. We rejected the terms of reference of the policy panel because we thought, why should we stand there? I think my phrase was like a bunch of penguins waiting for someone to throw us fish. It was one way, downwards. And I think the general gist of the meeting was that we would just resign, all of us, en masse, if it wasn't a two-way street. And that was taken thoroughly aboard because the leader of the council, pro tem, was there. So my view is, and to take two sides of it, is yes, I think the environmental side of this should come from this. We should work up a scheme, and then we should put it to the policy panel to insist that it goes to Cabinet for an answer. So there are ways in which we can do this. Again, we seem to be piling pillion upon ossa in terms of the workload to our officers, but I'm sure they would love to do this, because I'm getting fed up with seeing it recur over the last 25 years, time after time after time. And it is a beautiful river with massive possibilities for the benefits of not just the residents of the town, but also for the wider area. Go to Sudbury and have a look at what they've got in the centre of the town, and look at the benefits that the store have made in places like Dedham. And we've neglected it. We turn our back on this incredible asset. So the structure would be, yes, work out what the environmental impacts are and what is feasible within a relatively moderate budget, because I suspect we'd get external funding for quite some of this. Give you an example, I got 300,000 for a little island in Mersey just to recharge it. So the money is there. If you can propose a scheme that sort of fits. And I think that the big thing at county now is going to be environmental issues. You know, I hope this is continued and carried through. I have no doubts about it at all. But, you know, we do what we can, and certainly from the policy panel point of view, I will do whatever I can with my colleagues to make sure that we can use that as a vehicle to carry the overriding policy views, and effectively insist that Cabinet do look at this and do come up with some proposals. So if that suits, I'm perfectly happy to agree with Councillor Scordis. I find I'm doing this far too frequently these days, but there we are.
Well, I mean, certainly that was my view, that we should take the management of the river as a topic for this panel to look at. Certainly there was some, you know, feedback to us as from officers that it should go to policy panel. But I think the compromise that is being suggested here, that I actually think is quite a good one, is that we take the environmental considerations of the river and look at it here, and maybe the commercial opportunities that the river provides goes to policy panel, and it will generally be the same officers that are working up those proposals. So I don't really see there's too much problem with it coming to here and policy panel, but we'll hear from Mr. Doyle in a moment. John, did you want to quickly come back?
Yes, because I think that, is it young Sam who's chairman of the policy panel? I can't see there can be any disagreement between the two panels. And it seems to me that that's really the best way of working, is consensual views. Forget ideology on something like this, you know, it's pointless really. It impacts on all of us, whatever, regardless. And so I'm sure that with the support of the chairman of the policy panel, if you could have a chat with him and, you know, say, where would he be comfortable with the division, I'd be very supportive of it. Don't you agree, Pauline? I do. Well done.
That's good to hear. I'm going to remind members that it's 10 to 7 and we've only just got through half the questions, but Councillor King, did you want to just come back briefly?
Very briefly, Madam Chair, cracking suggestion and worth the time, given the importance of this. Two things. One, Cabinet at County signed off just days ago a walking strategy, which includes a concentration upon nature walks and the coastline, the undiscovered coastline of Essex. So absolutely, we should be pressing on that door. How could we, working with county, exploit in the best sense what we've got here? And the second thing, Madam Chair, was to ask that we task officers to come back to us, so we've got time to think about this, when we next meet 1 month away, with a proposition along the lines that we've set out.
That sounds sound advice. Mr. Doyle, do you want to come back?
Thank you, Chair, and I'll be brief. I think, as members have highlighted, the river presents so many opportunities from a number of different perspectives. its contribution to regeneration of the town, economic prosperity, health and well-being, in addition to its environmental and sustainability, the things it can add there. In that sense, it's very difficult, I think, perhaps to separate those things out because they all interrelate with each other. And I think that's why there was a suggestion to look at it in the round and take a really holistic approach. From a really pragmatic perspective, I'm aware that we'll talk about the work programme, I know, on the agenda this evening. There's quite a full work programme for this panel. There is availability on the work programme for the policy panel. So from a pragmatic perspective, my view would be that it would still get the same level of kind of scrutiny and challenge and the opportunity to bring forward, present ideas. It's just whether the panel feels that it's appropriate to separate the work streams out and whether there would be any unintended consequences of taking that approach rather than a more holistic approach where the panel could look at things in the round. Really briefly, just going back to the Ferry Marsh question, as Councillor Corrie alluded to, the countryside team are working closely on that and have been doing, continue to liaise with the developers down there too. And I know there is an issue with the sluice gate, and I know that we are liaising with them to do some more work on that. So it is in hand, officers are aware, and we hope to move things forward.
Thank you very much. I'll sort of round this up at the end, but I think, Cyril, you have a further minute if you wanted to come back to the panel.
Thank you, Chair. I don't wish to criticise the well-meaning efforts of CBC officers, but quite frankly, talking to developers and their agents is a complete waste of time. Ferry Marsh and the River Colne may be priorities for us, but they're not for them. They're seasoned operators who are accustomed to stonewall local authorities with warm words and little action and even less money. It is vitally important that CBC legal department talk to the Treasury solicitor directly to establish the process for acquiring that land and the cost. I make that plea because I've come here to offer a specific solution to a larger problem. It's good to hear the Alleluia chorus. We're all singing from the same hymn sheet about the beauty of the River Colne. I've offered here a specific solution that I think should be followed up. And if we don't, we'll be having the same conversation again in 5 or 10 years' time. So once the land is acquired, CBC has complete ownership and can then deal with all these kind of issues. Whether it's more human-friendly or more nature-friendly, that's a discussion for another time. CBC must acquire that land and do so as soon as possible. Thank you.
Councillor Corrie, you wanted to come in there and then, briefly, because as I say, time is rolling on, and then we'll go back to Mr. Doyle.
Absolutely, Chair. Thank you. No, that's what we're trying to do. That's what I'm trying to do with officers. I really believe that's the best way forward because we've got the largest part of that Ferry Marsh is the nature reserve. In order to get control of how it is managed in the future, we need to acquire those parts of land. And that's what officers are working on. I think the panel tonight have given support to extra impetus in that. So I'll be chasing that work. As of the last email of the 21st, I'll keep chasing that one.
Thank you for that. Mr. Doyle.
Nothing really to add, Chair. And as Councillor Corrie says, officers will continue to pursue the options as Councillor Corrie describes.
Presumably, which is including sort of getting on to the Treasury solicitor?
I know we're in contact with the landowners, so I'll take away all of former Councillor Liddy's views and we'll feedback, and I'll speak to the team in detail in terms of the actions they've taken already, whether they've done that. If they haven't, we'll pursue that as an option too.
Just returning briefly, members, to the issue about where we take the management of the river forward, and we've heard what Mr. Doyle has stated in terms of separating the issues out. There seemed to be quite a strong steer from the members of the panel that we ought to have some oversight of this in this panel. Is that the will of members to do that? And I think, yes, it is. I'm seeing nods around the table. So I put it back to you, Mr. Dole, that the committee would like to pursue that piece of work here. And that's kind of a recommendation from the panel back to you.
So obviously, as an officer, I take that feedback. Obviously, the panel has the ability to make the recommendation to Cabinet. I would just add, the panel has always got the opportunity to feed in on environmental aspects. So if there was a piece of work led by the policy panel, this panel would, of course, have the ability to contribute on environmental aspects of that. So that opportunity wouldn't necessarily be lost. So that's obviously the point I'd like to make. But if the panel obviously can make the recommendation to Cabinet, that's what it would like to do.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Jowers.
I can understand where you're coming from on this, and I think that possibly it is a route through, is that it goes to the policy panel, but the members of the policy panel ask that the environmental aspects of it be reviewed by this panel. And then they can put their reports back to the policy panel, which will make a whole that we can then put forward to the Cabinet. Does that sort of make sense?
Are members happy with that approach? It looks like we are, so we'll leave it with you, Councillor Jowers, to be our voice at the policy panel to make sure that happens. And Councillor Gocher, and Councillor Cox, actually. So we've got 3 of you here that have heard the debate, and Councillor Corey.
Chair, as much as I trust those 3 people we've just named, can we make it official that that is our way forward and sort of our recommendation goes officially through the officers to the board, and then these fine councillors can pick it up at the meeting? But I think we should officialise that position. Thank you.
I'm happy to do so. Is that an agreement? It looks like it is. Thank you. So we're on to our next speaker, which is Andrew Wilkinson, and I think this is a written submission. So Matthew, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. This submission is from Andrew Wilkinson, representing Enform and Eco Colchester. And he says, in the last Environment and Sustainability panel meeting on the 11th of March 2021, it was stated that you would design a development document for the local plan on sustainability and carbon reduction. When is this document likely to be produced and implemented? In the same meeting, it was stated that a review of the natural asset list would take place. What is the natural asset list? Where can it be found, and when will the list be reviewed? What is the purpose of the list, and what protection of local natural assets will the list provide? Related to both these issues, we would like to suggest again that the local plan needs to reflect not just where housing and development can take place, but where wild areas and open space should be preserved and extended. As we previously stated, it is far more effective and efficient to preserve biodiversity by extending existing wild areas than creating them in areas with no existing biodiversity infrastructure. We also need to preserve Grade A farmland to produce food in the most efficient manner, and this should be designated within the local plan. The farmland in East Anglia is some of the best in the country, and this needs to be reflected in the local plan to meet national food security needs and reduce food miles. And that's the end of the submission.
Thank you very much. Well, I certainly sit on the local plan, and a lot of what has been submitted to us in that question actually, I think, sits with the local plan committee. But I'm going to invite Mandy Jones to answer the specific questions about the sustainability and carbon reduction document within the local plan and the natural asset list.
Thank you, Councillor Young. I think what Mr. Wilkinson is referring to here is the supplementary planning document in the local plan, and that's the document that will support the local plan in relation to climate change and sustainability. And this is for those people who don't know, members of the public, and for those councillors who aren't aware, this is the additional detail on how the local planning authority interprets and apply the specific policies in the local plan in relation to climate change and sustainability. In terms of timing, we have to time this with the emerging local plan, as the SPD, supplementary planning document, needs to stem and follow that adoption And we're not quite there with the Section 2 yet. We still have the inspector's decision yet to come with likely modifications. So we're expecting that work on the supplementary planning document to commence later this year following the adoption of the local plan. And the procedure for preparing that document involves a number of steps and stages of work, and that includes consultation and engagement. They're all required to be undertaken as part of that process. And that process can take 12 to 18 months from start to finish. So the recent local plan committee agreed a schedule of work on supplementary planning documents, and the completion of this supplementary planning document is anticipated by autumn 2022. And more information can be found in that local plan committee report. In terms of the local plan itself, the local plan does reflect obviously areas of housing development, but it also reflects areas of the natural environment which require protection. And it recognises through strategic policies all relevant considerations, including the protection of open natural spaces through the environment policies in that local plan. So they're recognised and needed to be protected is recognised there, including national designated areas and green infrastructure and policies for managing the impacts of development. In terms of the natural asset list, I think what's being referred to is, I don't think there's a specific list, but there are several ways that natural assets are recorded. There is the local plan proposal maps, which look at national and international nature conservation sites, such as the areas, the special scientific sites of special scientific interest. I can never say that one, and special areas of conservation. And they can be found at the Joint Nature Conservation Committee website, so that they're available there. And then local wildlife sites are also reviewed as part of our emerging local plan, and they can be viewed in that evidence base as well. So our protected species are also routinely surveyed, and that's a very detailed process, and it's a time-consuming process. I think just in terms of planning applications, where there are potential protected species issues are required as a minimum to be carried out, is what's called a preliminary ecological appraisal. So I think that's as a minimum usually, and then also as a minimum a phase 1 habitat survey. So there are checks in relation to each major planning application as well. And there is a green infrastructure strategy as well. So that has some of those sites in it. That's now 10 years old, but it's anticipated we'll review that in the light of the government's environment bill. So that will be specifically linked to that bill. And that bill is expected to receive assent in the autumn. So I think it's prudent to any sort of refresh of that document comes following that assent. So I hope that helps in relation to those questions and the issues that have been raised.
That was really helpful, Mandy, to set out the detail of that, which is obviously a very full response to the question put to us. I've got Councillor Jowers.
Yeah, thanks very much, Madam Chairman. Mandy was absolutely right, but of course, time overtakes all things. And unfortunately, we have a white paper out, and certain things possibly, hopefully not, might occur where we have a new planning bill and a new MPPF, which may well come through before 2022. Now, that really should be flagging up some big red danger signals. Because actually, if you look at the local plan maps and the local plan policy papers, it's all in there. I mean, the Ramsar sites, SSSIs, SACs, they're there. They're really well protected. But they should have a major impact on whether or not they are protected. And that's going to be the big issue. And I'm certainly now going to lay a marker down about Mersey Island, because it's surrounded by the flipping things, that it should come under the aegis of a protected site. It doesn't mean there's no planning. It just means that if there are plans, they at least come before a committee. It's a bit like the American zoning system is the proposal. I think it's a dreadful system, but it will be whatever is determined in Westminster. But I think from our point of view, we need to big up as far as we can what Mr. Wilkinson, I believe it is, says is a natural asset list. So we already have them, but we need to be very clear which areas we need to give more protection to in the event of, before 22, the government says that this area is going to be zoned. So just flagging it up that we need to be very clear as to, I'd rather be ahead of the game rather than fighting back at some didact on the green benches telling us what we ought to do. I get fed up with it.
I think that was a case well made, and I think, you know, I suppose we note the concerns, the committee notes the concerns that you've raised in terms of being prepared for any legislation changes by Westminster, that we've got the protections in place as early as we possibly can be, accepting the fact that we know that planning officers are very pushed in terms of, they've had a tremendous amount of work to do to get the local plan prepared. But we want to see these policy documents put in place as early as possible, and autumn 22 does seem quite a long way away. And I think from our perspective, from this committee, we would, I guess, put our concern forward to the local plan committee that they kind of address those issues sooner rather than later before legislation changes. But of course, that sits as a piece of work with the local plan committee, which some of us sit on, so we can follow that up. So we do not have Andrew here to have his final minute, and I see no other hands, so I think we'll leave it there, committee, and we'll move on to Grace Dark, who I believe is joining us on Zoom.
Hi there, I'm representing Nform and Eco Colchester. So we are aware that new councillors receive training on a range of items such as adult social care, IT and planning, but until recently, no training in environmental matters, including climate change. When we discovered this, we were quite surprised, considering the environment underpins almost every area of people's lives, and even more worrying considering that the council have declared a climate emergency. We believe this to be a major gap in training, and their lack of knowledge is councillors' lack of knowledge is jeopardising important progress, and it's sometimes showing. We understand there has been a recent council training session on the council's climate emergency strategy, which was not fully attended. Just wanted to confirm if that was true. This is promising, but will there be any further training involving all councillors and all staff? What will the scope of this training be? Who will be providing the training, the organisation, their credentials, etc., which topics will be covered? We would hope that ongoing comprehensive training in this area would form compulsory training for all councillors and staff. We feel that success in meeting national and local biodiversity and carbon emissions policies and targets will require contribution from all councillors. They need to be actively aware of the issues and contribute to the implementation and communication of them within their wards and to the general public. We feel this is an important point that needs addressing as soon as possible, as from our discussions with councillors, many are not aware of how environmental issues affect most sectors of life. Many are unaware of council policy or the work being undertaken by the council. This lack of training and understanding of the issues is being very obviously communicated through things like social media, and is causing a lot of confusion and also division within the public. It's not helping the council in terms of making adequate progress for meeting its environmental responsibilities and targets. We would welcome the opportunity to attend such a training programme so that we could give some constructive feedback also, if possible. We've been concerned at how the council's environmental policies and projects are being communicated, and to councillors in particular. We have spoken to 3 councillors in the past 2 weeks who have been unaware of the council's No Mow project. They were also unaware of the No Mow policy in a number of trial areas within the borough or their location. Are all councillors aware of this project, and importantly, why it is occurring and why these spaces were chosen? It is, of course, a challenge to communicate these policies to all the residents of the borough, but we do feel the council should be informing its staff, councillors, and also parish councils on its policies and projects. As often, sometimes we feel that we're communicating some of this information ourselves. Overall, it is vital that knowledge and science lead decisions on our environment and not opinion. It is also unacceptable to be using the environment as a political football when its importance affects everyone so greatly. We are pleased that the council declared a climate emergency, but it's really important that they are reflecting that also. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Grace. I mean, a number of us, I think, communicate with you on various social media channels, and there's been some interesting debates on many of those community Facebook pages, which is kind of one way of getting the messages out, I guess. There was recent training. I believe that's probably the first time we've had some training on climate issues, but I'd certainly welcome additional training because it's a really important topic, and it's really important that councillors, in terms of their leadership role within their wards, champion those policies that we have adopted here at the Town Hall. It's a complex issue. I think that training needs to be quite bite-sized so people can absorb that information. We've got a member of the member development panel with us this evening who may want to speak further on this topic. I'll invite him to come in shortly. I think the question mark is whether it should be compulsory training. The training we received happened shortly after the local elections when we've all been very busy in our communities. And I think the turnout wasn't particularly high, so not all councillors did attend. I think we can confirm that. But I definitely agree with you, Grace, that we need to have further training to make sure everybody knows what is going on in terms of the policies that we have adopted. I'll bring Mandy in at the end, and I think perhaps Maggie might have some contributions on this, but I've got Councillor Corey who's indicated, then Councillor King, and then Councillor Jowers.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Grace, for being patient this evening. And I fully agree with you. I think you would probably acknowledge that we've taken quite a few steps forward on the environment in the last few years, and I will take credit as the administration from last time taking things forward, but I do think we've got a long way to go. I do agree with you on the communication. We found last municipal year that the e-cargo bike project, a fantastic project that we run, was not fully known to all of the councillors. And I think some of us who were running the administration sometimes feel that we're wrapped up in it. We try our best to communicate it out, but it doesn't fully get out there. So I do think we need to double down on the communications. I know we've got Richard Clifford in the room. I do think that for the first time we had part of our environmental work as part of the induction training for new councillors, but I think it should be a standalone item. I do think, Chair, as you suggested, that it does become part of the compulsory training at the beginning. And I also would like to see more regular briefings that we had put in place and did have recently the other day. I think that's really important that all councillors understand, because we do have questions. We are some of the best champions to get out information to our communities about what we're doing as a council. We have made strides. We do need to go further. So I do completely agree. And as Grace was speaking, I was definitely thinking, and she did go on to say, about asking Enform and Colchester to come in and be part of that briefing. They were part of the briefing that we had as an organisation when I was leader, when we worked with the Colchester, One Colchester Partnership, that involves other public sector organisations and third sector organisations. So we are trying to fulfil that role as being a steward and giving leadership to our other organisations. We have to keep doing that. I want to work in partnership with people like Colchester and Enform, who really are down in the grassroots, because sometimes we have a bit of institutional blindness there. So really supportive of what Grace was saying. I think we should take that forward, agree with sort of part of the compulsory training to be focused on the environment, but I would credit that I think Richard's team did try and include some of it. I'm pretty sure Maggie was there giving part of the briefing in the induction sessions, but let's do more. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much indeed, Grace, for bringing this to our attention. I mean, what I get from you are a number of things, some facts, some frustration, perhaps a lot of frustration, and absolute passion for the subject. And all I can sort of reflect back to you is that I've seen a real change in awareness in councillors and the wider public, but it's a huge way to go. I think the best way to get there is not, personally, is not by making everything compulsory. I think it's by choosing how we do this, doing it well, and drawing people in, and making them feel a sense of ownership and understanding in the way, Madam Chair, you described. I think we have to make this digestible. The papers for tonight alone, there's a huge volume of material here, and I want to make sure that we take councillors personally with us. There is a place, I think, for induction training being compulsory on the climate challenge, because this is absolutely central to what we do. But I think that's the place, that's from my perspective, but we should monitor it. I think the in-year programme of councillor development training should have each year, I think, a number of modules. Madam Chair, you reminded me that we got very good attendance last year in the midst of the pandemic on pandemic-related matters. We got very good attendance on the financial crisis that a year ago we were working our way through. So I think it's how we shape and frame the sharing of information, the quality of engagement we get. I think you can contribute, I'm sure, to how we do that. But that's, as I say, my take. As a member of the member development group, there's a title for you. I will promise to make sure that this is part of our conversation when we look at the future years, internal training for members, and working with my colleagues and the group leaders of the other parties. I'm sure that we can make real progress in the months ahead in terms of individual awareness. One last thing. I think it's really important, you use the words political football, that we don't make the environment and our relative positions on this such a point of difference. In my view, it mostly is not. We are in the same place. This council as a whole signed up to tackle and accept a climate emergency. Money, energy and effort for a bureaucracy that's quite big is actually gone at some pace in the right direction. So that's my bureaucratic feel. I think we're heading in the right direction, as tonight's meeting should start to show. And I think members' awareness will grow as we work our way through this programme of work. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the contribution, Councillor Jowers.
Oh, well, thank you, Madam Chairman. It's sort of declaring an interest, really, that I am a member of the Climate Change Commission at Essex County Council. Now, what this is sort of an extra cabinet member, a 10th one. And that shows to a degree quite how important that is. Now, hopefully it will complement whatever we may do here. I'm inclined to agree with Councillor King. I keep doing this. Honey catches more flies than vinegar, Madam Chairman. And compulsion to local politics is a big put-off. It really is. It's all very well. I mean, I've spent most of my life in the middle of the environment, you know, as a commercial fisherman and various other things, you know, planting wildflower meadows and God knows what else. But you can't let that single issue structure stop you looking at the wider breadth of what our electorate ask us to do. I'm sure that actually a huge percentage of them would be all in favour of anything we put forward. But I would agree that compulsion doesn't work, not in that particular context. I think it should be part of our briefing and education, but then again, if we go down this route to its nth degree, we will have 3 months of induction training, and many people will get slightly cheesed off with it. Actually, I think this panel is the right place. And of course, if Enform or Ecological wish to make representations here, then that's the right place to do it. And trying to, we might be able to say, well, you must do this. I mean, I've got to read a look at a 20-minute video tomorrow morning to go enter a planning meeting at county. Would you credit? I'm not happy. That is, you can take things, push things, where suddenly you're leading a horse to the water. But it's counterproductive in my view sometimes. So the gist of it all, yes, I think, there is massive burst of awareness and feeling towards this, but don't make it compulsory.
I've got Councillor Hazel.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with Councillor King and Councillor Jowers in regard to compulsory. And perhaps it would be helpful for members of the public to know that if a councillor, for whatever reason, cannot attend a particular training, he or she receives all the documentation, the slides, and everything needed so that they can actually learn about it when they are free. And I think that is something we ought to continue. I know amongst my colleagues, and in fact everybody I speak to, environment is very much in their thoughts, and I think we will move as one on this as a council, and I think all members are signed up to it, and I think the way we are going is a good way forward. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, I'm going to bring in Mandy Jones a moment, and I think you make a really strong point in terms of the resources are made available to every councillor, whether they were at the training session or not. So I think that is good to put that on record. And there are often good reasons why councillors can't be there. And I know, Councillor Hazel, you do attend a lot of the training sessions, as many of us here do, but there are sometimes reasons that you can't be there. Mandy Jones, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Grace. Some really good challenges there, I think, in relation to engagement. For the Climate Change and Sustainability induction session was a new member session, so it was only targeted at a very few members. But I think you rightly make the point that actually this shouldn't be the end of it. We need to be engaging with residents, our visitors, our members and our businesses and our members of staff, and we need to think about methods to be able to engage with them. I think Councillor King mentioned Councillor Corey mentioned the One Colchester group, and we have set up a subgroup of that group to look at different engagement methods and how we engage with people, because some of these subjects with people like carbon management, for instance, are quite dry, and actually we do need to make them exciting, and we need to make them relevant, because that's where we will make our biggest impact. So I think that's not the end of it. Maggie Ibrahim, I'd like to ask if the chair would bring Maggie in, because she will have a bit more detail on what's being planned. But I know that she's planning some engagement with the university, and we have been in touch with Essex County Council in relation to their work that they're doing, and are exploring some avenues of potentially doing some behaviour change projects, for instance, and some nudge projects with them as well. So thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. I'm happy to bring Maggie in, and I think she's on Zoom.
Thank you. I won't repeat much that has been said. I probably should introduce myself. So I'm Maggie Ibrahim, the Sustainability and Climate Change Manager. I've been in place for about 8 months now, and I thank you for this request for further information and your wonderful offer to have a look at some of the training programs offered for members as well as staff. So a lot has been said already. The main aim, that the kind of bottom line that members need to know is to always think, what's the linkage to sustainability and carbon reduction here for any decision making that they do. And if they've walked away with that thought in mind, then I'm quite pleased as the bottom line question for them to keep in mind. All of the information, the PowerPoints, all of the documents that have been produced are online and available. The PowerPoint slide has been shared and was sent out to all members. I'm pleased to say 50% of members have turned up, so it was about 23. And we did a poll, a survey to see their proficiency on how they would rate themselves. And I was happy to say that those that attended said they were between, medium proficiency. So that's great. And everybody was high passion. And I think that's probably what you're trying to communicate here with the underlining message is that you would like everybody to have proficiency and passion in this area to demonstrate outcomes. And I can assure you the council officers are on board. In terms of behaviour change, as Mandy mentioned, we're working with a range of partners to ensure that we do see the behaviour change that we expect to see, both in terms of direct emissions reduction as well as indirect emissions reduction. So we've developed a strategy, we've realigned our action plans, of which we've got more than 50, and we're bringing out this consultation on the strategic themes to the community and looking at deepening our engagement through partners as well as looking at different modalities of participatory democracy. So I think in the next 6 months, you should be very pleased to see us much more visible and out there. As you can see, I've got a new background. We've done a lot of work on design. I congratulate the design team for taking that up for us in short time frame. And we've got, brand, logo, communications, strategy. And I would encourage you, if you can, stay and watch the presentation that I'll be making to the panel later on, because it's an overview to get people onto the same page. And so what the members training is very similar to what I'll be doing now, however, with a bit of a deeper dive on some elements. But the question left off to all members when I provided all of the details from the training was, where would you like more information? Because this was a taster, recognizing that we cover the breadth of the work. So whether they're interested in fleet or biodiversity or energy, we can always do follow-up, and it's much better to do it with the willing and do the carrot option. That's the way that we're going forward. But Inform or other residents, groups, we're always interested to learn from experience and best practice, and we're very much linked into the Commission's work, as Mandy mentioned. So I feel confident that we're making good strides. So thank you for your encouragement and your challenge.
Going back to you, Grace, thank you very much, Maggie. You have a further minute if you'd like to use that time.
Thank you for everyone's responses there, and it's actually very encouraging to hear what I've just heard from Maggie. So I actually feel a little quite hopeful with everything you've just said there, and agree with you about, I suppose, the compulsory element. I guess from our side of things, being at the grassroots, it's very frustrating. We hear lots and lots of opinion, and then with all the opinion, it creates division, and then we often find, I think people in the end find it so confusing. They'll just bury their head in the sand. And obviously, being I suppose I'm being a little bit impatient as well, but the councillors, I suppose, are leading and that change, and they have this responsibility for that, and we could be making big strides if we once their knowledge or at least understanding improves, which it sounds like it's going to. So hopefully it's just something that's going to be happening soon. And Inform and Colchester, we have lots of networks and also experience, and it would be lovely to actually link up with you, Maggie, and obviously provide any assistance and help, or even just to help with communication of any kind. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time.
Thank you, Grace. And I think, final word is, I think we all want to create change, but it's about taking our communities with us. So we thank you for attending this evening, and we look forward to further dialogue with you in the future. Members, we've spent an hour and a half on that, but I think it was an hour and a half that was interesting and well used. We're moving on now to item number 7, which is, as Maggie has just described, the overview of the Sustainability and Climate Challenge stream and next steps. And I believe Maggie is going to do that presentation to us.
Yes, thank you very much, Councillors. So I'm tempted to canter through this because many of you have seen it and the slides can be made available. However, if I ask you to just let me know if I should slow down, I'm happy to do so. I would like to say that Ben Plummer, who's the Climate Emergency Officer, has put this together with me, and he's running a session for the Association of Parish Councils, so it can't be with us today. So sorry, it's going to be my voice throughout, but I'll try to walk through this sensibly. So here is the overview, why we've got a declaration for net zero carbon emissions by 2030. Let's look at the carbon emissions as simply as we can. We'll go through the strategy, the action plan, and some of the key projects you might like to see in terms of what we expect is coming over the year, and some plans for upcoming projects as well. So why a climate emergency? Originally, I wanted to show a different video than the climate weather forecast that I had provided for the members training. This one is an independent assessment of the UK climate risk advice, which just came out. And I must say that it is worrying, but I think we can also blend that in with some hope that we are tackling the climate emergency. We declared a climate emergency in 2019. We developed an action plan in 2020, and we've started a consultation document now looking at 8 strategic themes. And the why is simply because our global warming is exceeding our comfort zone, where we need to take care of our planet in order for it to take care of its peoples. And we have signed through the Paris Agreement, the UN Climate Change Agreement, our nationally determined contributions, basically our pledge to do so and to reduce emissions by 2030 as soon as we can, and at latest 2050, recognizing that the temperatures, emissions have impacts on temperature for a 30-year lag. So if I can just take us now into where do our emissions come from? So what's the scope of the council's target? So the council net zero carbon emissions target is 0 by 2030. So where this comes from is simply our assets, so our buildings, our fleet, and the staff travel. Underneath the and that comes through in terms of electricity, gas, waste, and shared spaces under the sheltered housing stock. For staff travel, that looks at business mileage and commuting.
Can I just ask you to hold on a moment, Maggie?
Sure.
Man, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Maggie, we can't see your presentation, and I understand you're showing it. Is that right? Is it being shown on the screen? I wonder if there's a technical hitch there because we can't actually see it. And I know it's got some nice pictures in for us.
Yeah. Okay. Let me just.
So it doesn't show. It doesn't matter. But I just thought I know that you put a lot of effort into it.
Sure. Let me try to share a screen again. Sorry if that didn't work. Okay. How are we doing?
It's there, Maggie. It just needs to go onto slide view.
Yeah, sure thing. Okay, apologies for that, but it is helpful to have visuals and we all learn and listen differently. So basically, the net zero emissions target is here at the top. And where this comes from is our assets, our fleet, and our staff travel. The assets are basically our buildings, the council operated, and the sheltered housing stock. And where you see emissions coming through to assets is electricity and gas consumption, waste production and water consumption. And then for the sheltered housing stock, we've got the shared spaces of electricity and gas consumption. For staff travel, it's what you would expect. It's business miles and commuting. So I'm going to go to the next slide now. Okay, so this gives you a breakdown. The importance here is basically to say, if you can just remember the top number. So we've got our direct emissions, and I've gone over that in the slide above, but previous slide rather. So just remember about 6,000 tons. And then if we go to indirect emissions, which is outside of the scope of our 2030 target of net zero, we've got about 27.5 tons. And that comes from about similar things. So leased buildings, commuting, which is, travel, business travel, waste, investments, and procured goods. We do have companies that contribute to this, and where we can, we do ensure that they're aligned with all of our commitments that we've made for our direct emissions. So we should see some of the 27.5 come down over the years. Let's delve into that 27.5 a little bit more, called the indirect, sometimes called scope 3 emissions. We've got sustainable travel options, which we've been encouraging, investing in, and building upon. Sustainable waste management, biodiversity, enabling community, and sustainable planning and development, which we've spoken about, the SPD and climate change. So within these areas, especially around planning and development, enabling communities, well, in terms of all of these 5 elements, they will provide significant decrease in emissions, and they are part of our forthcoming strategy. But before I get into that, let's just look at this in terms of what's been achieved and where we're moving to. So as I have just shown you, we've scoped out our emissions. So we're very clear on where these emissions come from. And we've developed an action plan and aligned it to a new strategy. So you'll see there in phase 2, we've got our sustainability and climate challenge strategy, which has 8 themes, and we've aligned the climate emergency action plan to those themes. We're currently doing a lot of work around influencing transportation and infrastructure, and we've provided different modalities of travel options, including e-cargo, as well as providing a pilot for e-scooters. Another area of work is that we're changing the way that we work. So we've put more investment into staff training, behavior change, tools, and more. Reducing direct carbon emissions, I think, is important to go back to our scope 1. You can see in this arrow here, we've got a change of about 5.4% between 1819 and 2019 and 20. So we're going to be working to develop some milestones with the Carbon Trust to see at what rate of a decrease of emissions should we be aiming for. So let's just look at what the strategy and action plan contains. So I mentioned that we've got 8 themes. So our first theme, and this is just an overview, I'll provide a little bit more detail as we go through the presentation. So if I'm cantering through and you wanted some explanations, they shall be coming shortly. So you can see on this, hopefully on the screen, but I'll just read them out. We've got reducing carbon emissions from buildings and fleet, recognizing the scope 1, producing renewable energy, enhancing biodiversity and protecting our environment. We're facilitating walking, cycling, and sustainable transport. We're also improving our sustainability waste management. We're enabling partnerships and community action for sustainability and carbon reduction. We're ensuring sustainable planning, and we're changing the way that the council works. So the net zero for buildings and fleet, we've gone to quite a lot of effort to look at a carbon management plan, and we've put that in place and acted upon it. And it's now come to the point where we need to renew our carbon management plan. And that's something that we will be doing. Within that and the scoping, we've highlighted that our fleet and some key assets are high emitters in carbon. So we're looking to decarbonize those. So for example, we've had funding from BASE, about £500,000 towards decarbonization of our headquarters, Rowan House, which has been great. And we've got plans for Leisure World. We're looking at some other assets such as Shrub End Depot and others to look at proposals of how we can move those into a decarbonization plan. In terms of our fleet transition, we've worked with the Energy Saving Trust, who have highlighted that this has to be done in a sensible manner over time. As we know, technologies are always changing and making the business case more feasible for us with new innovations and technologies, so costs will come down. So at the moment, what we've done is we've changed where we can small electric vehicles, cars and vans from petrol to electric, and put the charging points in place. And what you'll see here is that we'll go through from 2020 to 2030 with the plan, and we'll continually be evaluating that plan going forward. I'm happy to say that we've pulled out this produce renewable energy because we really wanted to put a spotlight on it. It's one of the areas where we are leading in terms of local authorities with the Northern Gateway. We're producing energy, renewable energy, through underground aquifers and heat pumps to provide energy for commercial space, for homes, for care homes, for business. And this will be ready hopefully in 2024. We've already done some work in terms of feasibility and moved forward from that. So another area of work, in addition to this award-winning design scheme proposal and implementation, is that we will be looking for solar powered energy farm, which is also in proposal stage at the moment. So we can be proud that Colchester Council is moving forward in producing renewable energy, and not only that, but it's linking it up to its assets where it would normally use carbon emitting fuels. It will now be a renewable energy, and will bring down our Scope 1 emissions and provide energy sources for Scope 2, which is, direct and indirect. Well, we've got our director, Rory Doyle, here on environment, and he can speak to any questions that might come up here. But in terms of enhancing biodiversity and protecting the environment, I hope you all know about the fantastic work of the Colchester Woodland and Biodiversity Project. It shows that we're learning by doing. We've transformed the project from looking at woodlands to including biodiversity. So we've planted trees, shrubs. We're looking at corridors for pollination of bees through wildflowers. We're looking at no-mow zones. And this is all done through and with the community energy, and leading to good mental health as well as sustainability. Our next strategic element here or theme is walking, cycling, and sustainable transport. I hope you've seen some of the e-cargo bikes around town, and they've been available for businesses to showcase or pilot, test a model for the e-cargo bikes, and have been used from different businesses, from bakeries to food banks and other, and they provide a great service, as well as being used by our own council. We've won another award from DEFRA in terms of implementing new modes of sustainable transport, such as a car club, electric car club. And we've implemented some infrastructure change, such as the wayfinding and improving cycle routes. We've also linked our concern with transportation and why sustainable modes of transport are imperative with our carless pollution campaign to improve air quality across Colchester. We've made ourselves available to implement a trial on e-scooters, which has been highly successful in Colchester. And we're looking at implementing secure cycle parking and looking at station travel plans. Sustainable waste management is our 5th strategic element, where we're encouraging a separation of cans and glass collection for recycling, and we're encouraging residents to reduce, reuse, and recycle. We've also put in new technologies for the recycling, which pinpoints which areas are not as proactive in their recycling habits and behaviors, to then provide more possibilities for them, more conversations around why it's essential to reduce the waste that we bring to the landfill and recycle. So this is where some of our partners that we've heard from earlier, enabling partnership and community action is essential to drive down the indirect emissions. We're working with a number, and they wouldn't be able to fit on a slide, but we thought we'd pull out some of these key partners, such as Colchester, which we've already spoken about. And we're working with Community 360, especially in terms of reaching the breadth of our demographics, looking at those who are most vulnerable and working with different ethnicities. We're very much working alongside Essex County Council, having at least monthly, if not more often, meetings around the different sectoral implementation plans that we could be putting in place. We've had fantastic conversations with Colchester Institute as a further learning authority, doing great work and innovation to ensure green recovery, and that residents have the opportunity to train in skills needed for a green economy. And we're working with the University of Essex in terms of helping us to facilitate and providing technical input and know-how around things like strategy development, identifying a target for indirect emissions with the community, as well as looking at the breadth of social democracy, anything from consultations and citizen assembly all the way to participatory budgeting. I don't expect you to be able to read this, but our next theme around sustainable planning and development, we've already spoken on the SPD for sustainability and carbon reduction, so I won't go into that. But what you see here is this table is the planning sustainability checklist for new developments, recognizing that we can't implement our SPD on sustainability and climate change or carbon reduction quite yet. What we can do is encourage new developments to consider a checklist as a way of demonstrating that they've thought about key questions. And this was presented to the panel last year, approved, and we shall and are monitoring its use to date, which will help in our developing the SPD once the local plan is approved and we can put that into motion. I could spend a lot of time talking on changing the way we work, it does impact every service area. And so one of the things maybe that won't come up and isn't maybe talked about is that we put in place, we've reformed our project board. We put in place a working group, a climate opportunities working group across all of the service areas, as well as our companies, so that everybody is going to be on the same page and understands the commitments, the opportunities, as we've called it, and how to work around some of the challenges that we might face. So we've provided them with training through a carbon reduction assessment, sustainability and carbon reduction assessment guidance and form that each project needs to fill in. Where possible, they need to count and collect information on carbon emissions reduction or production, and just be very transparent about that. We've also provided them with key messages in terms of, if any uplift, what are the outcomes, why invest in this in terms of both financially, what are the outcomes in terms of carbon reduction, but also complementary outcomes in terms of health and well-being, natural, environmental outcomes, and more. As I said, we could go on with the changing the way we work. The other element here that we've put on the slide is the social value portal, which many of you may have seen. We will review this and it will come to the panel in November as a report to show progress on the climate change elements in particular, to see how that's working for us and where we can improve. So what I wanted to say is that we're really iterative in our learning. We put something in place, we review, and then we change and adapt as we go. And I think that is the best place to be. So I'm quite proud to say that the Climate Opportunity Working Group and officers, as well as through the support of councillors, partners, and residents, have helped to identify carbon reduction work going forward. So one of the things is that we're zeroing in on some key performance indicators for our carbon reduction target of net zero by 2030. What's the pathway? What are the key milestones that we need to reach? How do we know we're on track? How fast do we need to decarbonize in terms of the context and the enabling environment in which we are in? I've already mentioned the sustainability and carbon reduction project assessment and guide, and that's really going to make a significant change into forthcoming work. We have our key asset decarbonization review. I've spoken about Leisure World. I didn't highlight that we've also got our asset review around housing, and that's a great piece of work that will agree on a standard, the Future Building Our Homes standard to 2025, so that all buildings, all new homes are net zero ready. And that also includes the social housing and retrofitting those assets. I mentioned that we had a carbon management plan, and we are seeking to implement a new one for 2022-2027, which will give us the cost for each asset and the plan for decarbonizing that asset, so we can pick and choose which one's going to give us the most value for money. I've highlighted the district heat network through the Northern Gateway and our plans to increase renewable energy. There's also a great opportunity around community energy through funding opportunities. So that will be one of the areas that will, and we are currently talking quite a lot about, and will have evolving over the next 6 months. I've spoken about the fact that all companies are part of our Climate Opportunity Working Group and work to the same commitments that the council does in terms of its sustainability and carbon reduction expectations to ensure that we meet our net zero target. And this includes our travel plan. So it's really important, even such things as Rowan House how many parking spots we will have for those who lease some of our spaces is, you know, a point of discussion. And all companies will have travel plans, and our travel plan will be up online shortly and will be reviewed in addition to having others up online. I'm pleased to say that we've started conversations with Climate Kick in terms of looking at new investment opportunities and carbon reduction. How do we stack both investments, the types of investments, be it the loans board or be it the new infrastructure bank? How do we stack types of investments? And then how do we bring together different local authorities to create an attractive package for investors? So this is something that we are excited about. And we'll work with the ECC on that, and have taken on board already and have thought through some of the recommendations from the Climate Action Commission. And finally, as I've mentioned before, we're consulting on our strategy, and we hope to deepen our community engagement for net zero carbon by 2030, both in terms of our direct and our indirect emissions. And that, I believe, is the end. So I'm happy to take any questions. I shall stop sharing. If you want me to go back to a slide, just say over to question time.
Thank you very much, Maggie. I think we're really well educated from that presentation, and I know there was a lot of detail in there, you know, like Winnie the Pooh, some of us have got very small brains, so it's a lot of overload there, I think. But, you know, we see the depth of the council's work on this agenda, and I think, you know, we thank you for the work you've put in, and I know you were recruited as an expert from the council to lead on this work, so we're very lucky to have you, Maggie. I'm going to open it up for comments or questions from the panel. And I've got Councillor Corey first, Councillor Scordis, then Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. Excellent to have an update of some great work put in train by some great people. And thank you to Maggie and to Ben in particular, and to Mandy and Rory and the whole team who are progressing this work and stewarding again the council's overall approach, not just in this particular department, but to ensure that the whole of the council understands the impact of each and every decision on our environment and on our biodiversity. I'd like to say that from the comments we had earlier about communication, I think it's really important that we are able to boil it down into some of our key achievable goals, some of our outcomes and some of our objectives. I think we need to continue to express those publicly. And I'm really pleased that Ben actually is tonight with the parish councils, ensuring that they hear the message of what we are doing, what partners are doing, and what role they can play. So I'm really pleased to see all of this. I'm happy to be trained to use those e-cargo bikes, and have done, and want to keep using those. And I won't pick out all the other good projects, but the heat network up at Northern Gateway and the solar panel farm that we could have are all fantastic projects that I've luckily been able to help in and would like to see delivered for our future generations in Colchester. So thank you, Maggie. Thank you for the update. And yeah, the only real point back is, can we boil it down into a way that we can sell more easily to the public and to organisations who can take a role in reducing their impact, joining together with us, promoting greater biodiversity, greater renewable energy usage. Thank you.
I've got Councillor Scordis next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, some really good stuff. It was really interesting reading through the action plan again, just to refresh myself after elections. So some really positive stuff to actually put out there. And I think one of our lessons is that we've struggled to put that out there. And I'm not sure if that's maybe we need to just coordinate a bit better with the comms team. because I have seen some good infographics that are very simple, easy to understand, but then nothing since, and that was quite a while ago. A few questions though. So on planning, I'd be interested to know actually what powers we have at our disposal, because one of the points we make is that we'll encourage developers to do nice things, but we'll encourage them, nothing else. And we all know around this table that developers will be focused on money. If they're more likely to sell a property because they put in recycled water or so forth, they'll do it. However, if it loses them money and they're going to sell that property anyway, they won't do it. So it'd be interesting to know what powers we have there and whether we can come up with more policy, although we do have the chair of planning here tonight, which is always nice. Also, on the cycling front, we mentioned how we've put in secure parking facilities. I'm not actually sure where these are, unless it's in Northern Gateway, and I haven't been there yet. I haven't seen any around town. If they are in, obviously not that well advertised, but that would be really good. And then to look at how successful they are over time as the town centre reopens, and whether we could expand them would be fantastic. No Mow May. I think we mentioned it already that some people didn't know it was happening, and there's some of those people were councillors, and some of our councillors in my group were asking about the verges being cut. I don't think we advertise that very well as a council to say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, what do you think, and so forth. We just had a lot of wet weather, and then people assumed that the council hadn't turned up to mow their verge. So probably some work to do on that front. But I think that's it from me, Chair.
Thanks very much. Maggie, do you want to come back now on the points raised there?
I can do. I will hand it over to either Mandy or Rory as well, where needed. In terms of the planning, we've covered the SPD, and we recognize that we have our local plan, which needs to go through its examination period, and then we can really get on to our SPD, which will give us more teeth. Until then, we need to encourage. We are encouraging, though, in a manner that highlights the benefit. So the cost benefit analysis for any uplift is clear to developers. And in fact, some developers are leading examples of low carbon zero designs. So I feel quite confident that moving forwards, we both have a changing environment. We have the legislation on the new building standards coming into place in 2025. We'll have our SPD. So we'll have our environment bill. So a lot of the stars are aligning, and we can take this up again into the planning committee, as was spoken about earlier. The question around Councillor Corey around communications, we have a communications plan in place for the action plan as a whole, as well as for key projects that will be delivered under the Climate Emergency Action Plan. And we are coordinating. I think the COP26 in Glasgow gives us a great opportunity to demonstrate how we will be moving our commitments forward, and we're always happy to have people communicate on our behalf some of the work that's been done. As I've mentioned, you know, we've got new logo. We've had a challenge for what our strapline should be for Colchester Community Action, and much more. So the portfolio holder on communications can share the briefing there. So the next thing was the no mowing of May and the wilding work. And I want to congratulate the council and officers who are taking this up. And in the pre-briefing, we had Councillor Oxley make some really good suggestions on sharing with the parish council having them share their lists of which zones are being mowed and which zones aren't, so that people are made aware. I think that will help in terms of communications as well, but perhaps Mandy or Rory want to be brought in on any other items I might have forgotten. Thank you.
I think I'll bring in Rory at the end, if I may, because time is getting on. We'll do a break at 8, and I think that would be welcome. But I will try and finish this item before we take that break. So I've got Councillor King.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Maggie. 2 observations and 2 questions. The 2 observations are these. There's an admirable ambition that you've captured in great substance here. And thank you to you and your colleagues. I worry about the sheer depth and breadth, and I'll get to that in just a minute. My second observation has really been made by others, but I want to reinforce it to help you and your colleagues. The communications, our website, the ways in which we make this real for people, that's a very big challenge. When I look at the website now, I've often thought this, if I'm frank, it isn't, it isn't for me. Maybe government normal, but this does not grab you. If you link our conversation tonight, Maggie, if we collectively are going to get the imagination of people, really get them to understand this has to be more than, and we've got some very good people in our comms team, this has got to be more than, can you squeeze this in? Mandy, we've got to get some, I'll say it again, some external resource. We have to say, if we're going to do any of the things we really say we're serious about, like engaging with communities, participatory development, we've got to have a leap forward from depth and detail, which is admirable, into something that's digestible, purposeful, and relates to the lives of people. And we have to be so careful to not only just have the academic, but also have that translated in a way that has meaning. And I think we've got a journey to go. This may just be me, but I do think that this is a wider challenge, that this could become so specialist, so deep, so rich, that what we want to do to make this adoptable by the wider population we serve, we'll fail on that challenge. We have to make an absolute priority for comms because we are so ambitious and we need great comms, not just good comms. That's a long, excuse me, Chair, a long second observation. My 2 questions, Maggie. The first one is resources to task. Given the breadth and depth of what's described, although in some senses early days, a few words from you on whether you think this has got the resources needed would be a help to us all. And the second thing is emotional engagement. We're making changes in behaviour, and I'll be really interested in your view about how much emotional engagement you see inside the council and with our partners for what is actually complex and sometimes difficult work. Thank you.
Maggie, do you want to respond?
So just if I recap, because there was a lot said there, was in terms of what's the emotional engagement in the staff and how are we reaching out to enable communities? Is that correct?
I think that would surmise it, yeah.
Okay, so the emotional engagement, we have to be careful, and what I've been trying to do is balance the language of emergency and threat discourse with the language of hope. Not because I am a hopeful person, optimistic person, but because actually behavior change and psychologists and research demonstrates that we need to balance concern with with hope and options and opportunities. So I hope that you'll see the discourse, any messaging being put forward from the council provides what the reality is, what the challenges are in terms of our service delivery and our environment, and then how we are going to meet those challenges and where we need help. So in terms of community enabling, I think it's important to remember we are a council, and our council is comprised of staff who are indeed our residents. So any kind of behavior change we do internally to the council also has an impact, a ripple effect out into the community. In addition to that, we have enabling community, as I've mentioned, within our strategic themes, and we will be deepening that and working with community-based organizations like Community 360 and others to reach the breadth of our demographics, looking at reaching the most vulnerable and working with different ethnicities. I say that because we've done some great work in terms of looking at greening and landscaping issues, green spaces. Where we need to deepen is provide opportunities for everyone in the borough to be able to take climate action. I think boiling down the message is David Attenborough does an excellent job, doesn't he? I think people in the public are aware of the issue. It's for us to show them how they can make the changes that we seek. And it's our responsibility to do it in a strategic manner and to build upon the strengths. So that's what the council has put forward in terms of its community can approach through the community enabling team, and we're building on that, and we're building that through some anchor institutions such as Essex County, such as the universities, such as Colchester Institute, and community-based organizations. A full strategy will be shared in the next months, and we'll deepen that engagement, and we'd be happy to hear any kind of boiled down messages from the public that might resonate. In terms of investment, I think was the other question. Do we have enough investment? Mandy and Rory will tell you that's the first thing that I brought up when I started is where's the dosh for us to do this? And as I mentioned in the presentation, one of the key areas of work now is moving forward, looking at how to make the most of the new infrastructure bank, and working with Climate Kick, who are very successful and have worked with bigger councils such as Edinburgh and smaller councils as well to help us stack financial modalities with or mechanisms with investment opportunities in the council, as well as in partnership, I hope, with other councils, perhaps tendering neighbouring councils or others within Essex. So that is underway, but any ideas, very welcome about how we can attract more investment. I would definitely be happy to learn from others on that. I think I'm going to stop there.
And I think, if I may, panel, we will take a break now, because I think, we can return to some of these topics in the next item for discussion. And I'm aware that, we all have our needs for our own well-being, to take a break, to get up and stretch our legs, and there may be panel members that have some health considerations that they need to take a break now. So I'm going to turn to the recommendation and just finish this item off, and they are under 2.1 of the agenda, which is really about noting at this stage. And I think we formally note and thank Maggie for her presentation, and it's not the end of the journey here. It's very much a journey that we're all on together. But I think finally for me, I would say, if you take the no-mo as an example that Councillor Scordis mentioned, and you, Maggie, in terms of the training that we had, there wasn't that awareness of councillors that was happening. And I see some really good slides in your presentation. I think one of them obviously came from one of the schools, and I noted it. It said, "No, May, we're letting nature grow," which I thought was a really good message that some child had obviously developed at a school. So let's note under 2.1 panel members, and let's take a 10-minute break. for sticking with it if you still are. And we're moving on to item number 8, members, which is the Climate Emergency Action Plan update. And we're over to Maggie again to introduce the item, and then we'll see if there's any questions that members wish to put to Maggie. So again, over to you, Maggie.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. As Ben Plummer is presenting at the Parish Association, I'll just give a very quick overview. And I thought, since we are quite late into the evening now, instead of going through the full report, the report is there. But what I thought I would do is just to pick out an item which you might have not heard as much about, and which is important to give a little bit more information on. So the first point there is with the Carbon Trust. We've been working with them for a number of years now to build up our scoping of our emissions, and we are wanting to update the council emissions projection with the milestones that I've mentioned. But what I haven't mentioned is that as part of that work to review proposals, our asset management strategy, and different proposals such as Leisure World and different assets, and to combine all of those proposals in terms of giving us our updated emissions projection, is also to look ahead and think strategically about our carbon offsetting. So that's something we haven't mentioned yet in the meeting, but it will be something that we work together with councillors and service areas to look at what was mentioned in the Have Your Say, look at our natural assets and see what we can do alongside planting trees and providing renewable energy, how we will look to bridge the gap between our expected carbon reduction through the best efforts that we can and any of the emissions remaining. So assets such as the town hall, you can't really retrofit our way out of those emissions because it's such an old asset, and we need to protect our heritage and culture. So our carbon emissions offsetting strategy will look at our natural assets, both green and blue, and see how we can create an offsetting strategy that will return the investment back into the local economy and demonstrate good projects for carbon offsetting under agreed principles. And so I just thought that was worth picking up for the panel, and the rest items we've mentioned or touched upon. And of course, there's more information on our website. And if there are points of suggestions for improvements of the website, please let us know. We've just updated the website recently to include all the material and case studies. We're happy to take any suggestions and work with the communications team to see what is feasible. So I'll leave it at that and let you, councillors or others ask any questions or suggestions.
I've got Councillor Jowers.
Thank you, Maggie. I thought actually that was a very good way of addressing this. You know, I am a bear of little brain, and at the end of a long day, I'd like to read through this, and certain issues on this I really think is good news. And I think we need sort of ongoing updates rather than just having to digest a massive chunk of data. I'm probably your normal elector. You know, we are all citizens, and we do need it. I think Councillor King probably made the point, is that we need a sort of précis, as it were. So that I think is very good. And in fact, I didn't even, it shows how much I know. I didn't know about the cargo bikes, and I think it's a very good thing, certainly for urban areas. Let's hopefully downstairs or whenever the CALC meeting is going on, I'd love to see some of them out in the rural villages. In fact, there'd be really good news there. In some ways, probably more effective than in the town. Interesting about the Eco Festival. And schools, there's been quite a push. I've been reading in Times and other newspapers about bringing back sort of the concept of school allotments and school gardens. And I know we are doing this in Colchester. It's happening actually, because my daughter-in-law's a teacher at Prettigate School, and she's always after flower pots so that they can plant their whatevers. These are the what a cliche. I can't say grassroots. These are the things, the very simple things, which dispel some of the cynicism that I feel I get forwarded back to me. Is why are we doing this? And particularly Councillor Scordis's issue on verges. I mean, I've had more emails on that issue than virtually anything else. And I can't believe it, I mean, admittedly, it was 3 foot high and there were probably tigers in it, but, And what we lose sight of is something actually I brought in via the county, is cutting the verge down to 1 metre cuts. So you can leave most of it to grow and thrive and flourish. Did we publicise it? No, we probably didn't. Do people know that when we do any road or verge works, we reseed with wildflower seed? Publicity. We've got to do little increments. But again, having said that, I'm really pleased about the Town and Parish Councils meeting, the CALC. That's really good news, because it's the Heineken effect. You're getting into them. So I like the way you presented that. It allows us to query it. Actually, there's very little on there that I would query. It's all good news. And I like the idea of the cooperation between various aspects of environmental issues. And certainly it'll help me on the County Council Commission. So thanks, Julie. That was good news.
Thank you. I think Mark's indicating, and Councillor Scordis, I mean, I'm sure Mark is going to point out that Wivenhoe Town Council are part of the e-cargo bike project. I think tonight's presentation to parish councils will be about those opportunities to take part in taking one of those e-cargo bikes. And I know in Wivenhoe, they've been using it to do sort of, transport their sort of grounds maintenance people around the community, and, go and clear up the lawn mowing and clear the graves and that sort of thing. But just to respond to Maggie, if I may, before I bring others in, I mean, carbon offsetting is one way that we will be able to use to meet that gap that we are going to have between what we're able to do internally and, what we can add in terms of partners. But it's about us showing some leadership there and coming up with a strategy to involve other organisations. I'll turn to Mark and then to Lee, and then I think, Rory, if you can come back briefly on the no-mow situation, which, like Councillor Jowers, it's been a feature of my postbag too. Councillor Corey.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, I smiled over at you when Councillor Jowers was talking about the rural areas. We in Wivenhoe have actually had use of 4 e-cargo bikes. So the town council has had 2, which I've ridden on and used to carry out different jobs. But we also have the Wivenhoe Norwegian Bakers. We also have the repair, reuse, recycle shop that recycles bikes. So he has a bike that carries about 10 other bikes on it going along. So anyway, it's great. And once you know about it, people start using it. So we clearly need to get it out there. And you're right, it works in rural areas and the lovely parts of our borough like Tiptree, Mersey and Wivenhoe. I would say that I'd like to see, and I think Grace Dark mentioned this, understanding a kind of audit of our spaces, because there are some great things that we are doing as a borough. We're working with Essex gradually to get those grass verges going, and other great projects that other partners are doing. But also I think we need to understand that every time our neighbours pave their driveways, we are causing a greater effect. Every time anyone uses AstroTurf instead of grass, it has a monumentally different effect upon not only runoff and the sort of physical effects, but the reflection of sunlight, the way it holds heat. It's completely different, and we keep manufacturing our environment and our habitats with a negative impact. I'd like to see how we can link with parishes, as Ben is today, to actually say, right, Wivenhoe, for example, which has attempted this before, can you do an environmental audit of your natural spaces and ask those parishes to build it up? So it is not just a job for us, but we steward that kind of role. And I think we do need to understand that, because if we don't, then each individual will not understand the impact of them astroturf or doing their drives or new roads that we are building. So we need to be very careful about the overall impact. So I think some kind of audit or some linking together of that would be really good, which is kind of touched upon in this update, but could we go further with that? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll bring Rory in at the end, I think. Councillor Scordis, just remind you members, my target date is 9 o'clock, so.
No, I won't ramble on too long. Just on No Mow May, I mean, I think a good idea on that would be, do we get feedback from residents of what they thought? And we know what something, because they've emailed us and texted us and so forth. I mean, one person wrote to me, couldn't you just put wildflowers there, for example, on some of the verges? Some we know that's not possible, but there's always options. I think something I'd like to see moving forward is that we expand the amount of people involved. So a lot of work's going to come down to our new community engagement team. But I think the more schools we can engage, and maybe nurseries, would be fantastic. Because first of all, we're getting young people involved, and all of us know that young people love animals. They kind of love nature. It's all curiosity. And at the same time, a lot of people in this panel are parents. I think you always find that you will tend to do what your child likes to do as well and move in that general direction. So getting more schools involved across Colchester would be fantastic. I know we've got some involved, but let's get more involved. And it's good press for them as well. So there is an incentive for them to actually do that. It meets a lot of their requirements on Ofsted. And I think the advertising, again, as you mentioned, Maggie, the kind of comms, just looking at improving that and how we can tailor that a lot better. So people are just aware of what the council's doing, such as, you know, we're decarbonising Rowan House, the refurbishments on Elfreda House. Most people won't know where that is, but if we can explain what it is and what we've done, little things like that are really positive to show that people's taxpayers' money is actually being spent on quite progressive initiatives.
Councillor Hazel.
Thank you, Chair. It's really very encouraging the way that people are engaging with this new idea that we must look after our environment. Like everyone else, the cargo bikes are a fantastic idea, and I'd like to see that pushed out more too. But speaking for Shrub End, they picked up very quickly, residents picked up very quickly on the Wivenhoe initiative to wildflower, and they are already in, our Residents Association are already in consultation with the zone wardens to actually see where we can wildflower in Shrub End. And also gardens and the schools, the local schools there, we are having 2 new gardens provided by Leela, the 5G cable company. They and their contractors are putting the money in to put in a brand new remembrance garden in Paxman Academy. There's one going into Kingsford, Iceni, and my own school, Gosbecks. I mean, they have a woodland garden, and they're growing stuff as well outside. So it's really encouraging, and I think the more we can bring in the local community, they do feel part of it, and it's making life better for everybody. Thank you.
Some really interesting contributions from members. If I can turn to you, Mr. Doyle, if you could just round this item up and then we can move on to the work plan.
Thank you, Chair. So some really good challenge tonight on how we communicate to residents and to members. So absolutely taken that on board. I think one of the key things that struck me is the fact that, you know, residents and members need to be able to differentiate between an area that just hasn't been cut yet, but it is intended to, as opposed to an area that actually is being left to naturalise. And so for some clarity, I think it'd be useful that there actually hasn't been any particular change or reduction in the number of cuts to our verges or any change in our policy during May or leading up to May. So everywhere that was due to be cut and maintained as part of our grounds maintenance regime is still the case. Of course, we had the weather that meant that a lot of the grass and the verges grew a lot more than they would otherwise. The exception to that is that we've got quite a long list of sites which this panel considered and agreed to last year, where we are managing a naturalisation process. So those are all in place and being monitored. So those are the exception. And we're doing that in quite a considered and careful way. And as I say, naturalisation isn't a case of just leaving. It actually requires some degree of management, or a great degree of management. And it's important that we monitor and look at those locations so that we can understand the impact of the approach we're taking. So we're looking at piloting it, understanding the impact, and then replicating it and scaling it when we can. We've got good examples of that. So we're working with the council supporting Wivenhoe Town Council with how they manage their green spaces as a parish. And again, I know there's lots of learning that's coming out from that. And I know we've been approached by a number of other parishes, and we can look to roll that learning out across those locations too, hopefully. I'm really pleased that we've made the connection with schools. So, Chair, you pointed at one of the butterfly signs. So I'm pleased to say all of the sites that have been set aside for naturalisation have all been individually paired with a local school. And each of those local schools has designed, the children themselves have designed a sign, and those signs are going to be put out on those sites. So it's very clear that they've been left to naturalise, the reasons for it, and promoting and the Woodland, the Biodiversity project, which is what this is all being delivered under. I think there has been the national No Mow campaign, No Mow May campaign. And of course, the council did support that in our comms and social media. And I think that's maybe caused some of the confusion too, because when someone has seen an area that perhaps just hasn't been cut yet, they've seen some social media around the promotion of No Mow May, and they've put the two and two together. So I think I can absolutely see some good challenge there around being clear about our comms. But hopefully the panel have provided some clarification on the approach that we're taking to naturalisation, and very happy to have conversations offline in how we're doing with that.
Thank you really very much for that. And I think that clarification that you've given to the panel tonight would be something that I think, if you haven't already done so, might be worth putting out to all councillors, together with a list of the areas that are being left to naturalise specific to their wards. I certainly asked for that information for Greenstead, but I think, whether people have asked for it or not, it's worth actually putting it out there. And then we can share it with our own communities, can't we? Just in terms of comms, I mean, the poppies along Clingo Hill are a joy to behold, actually. And I took a trip to Suffolk the other day, and I think they're a little bit further ahead than Essex in terms of their curbsides. And, the curbsides look absolutely glorious, actually. And certainly Clingo Hill looks absolutely glorious. So a few really nice pictures taken there actually would demonstrate how it could look in the future if we leave more of those areas to naturalise. So members, I think we'll leave the debate there for this evening. We thank you, Maggie, for your work on this. I think the decision we have here is to note the progress made, and we've had a chance to feedback on that work. And so if the panel is content, we'll close the discussion on that item for this evening. Okay, thank you. And members, we've just got item number 9, which is the work programme. And Matthew, I think you're going to take us through this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a pretty standard report. The panel has asked to consider and note the proposed work programme for the forthcoming municipal year. The only things I would draw your attention to in particular are we've inserted a further meeting in July. So the meeting of the 22nd of July is one that's recently been added into the programme. And I'm going to be looking over the next couple of days into rescheduling the meetings in September and November by a couple of days to avoid clashes with Leadership Board. But other than that, it's really over to the panel if they wish to have any input or discussion on this.
Councillor Giles, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I would say probably noted it's crystal clear and it's a clear explanation of what we need to do. Take it as read.
Thank you for that. I mean, as Matthew has said, we've slotted in an additional meeting in July. We've seen in terms of the two presentations we've had this evening, there's a lot of work to do. And so we thought it was necessary to put in a meeting in July. We hear what you say in terms of rescheduling in September and November. I've got Councillor Corey who wants to speak on this item.
Thank you, Chair. One of the points we all seemed to back earlier was Councillor Goucher's comment about the bags. I just wonder whether we actually ask if a small piece of work can be done on that and looked at by this panel, if that is appropriate and if there is capacity.
I'm very happy to support that. I mean, I think that shouldn't take too much time and work to actually bring something back to us. And I don't know whether that's possible for the next meeting, but perhaps soon, if we can do that, look at where there's a bit of funding. We've done Hessing bags in the past in terms of Colchester Market. Let's have another go at that and see where we can find some funding to take that forward. So I'm happy to accept that recommendation. We all happy with that? Yep. Councillor Scourgadis?
I mean, I would just add to that it would be good to collaborate with the bid because it involves the businesses. I think it's something that maybe the bid have funding for as well. That would help us. But also maybe they want to put their own branding on it. All the businesses, you know, it could be a bag that says one Colchester of all the businesses and bid and so forth. So just a suggestion.
Yeah, I think we'll leave it to officers to work that through. I mean, the only response I would give back to that is, of course, the bid is a member organisation, and so they may see the market as a competitor for their businesses that they're paying into. So Mandy is saying no, so we'll see how that turns out. We'll leave Mandy to work through on that item. Okay, so we're happy with the work plan, and thank you for that, and thank you for the comments made. And let me just get back to my agenda. And we have no exclusion of the public. So with 10 minutes to spare for my 9 o'clock deadline, I'll declare the meeting closed.